here, like literally everywhere else in the world. This podium was made for a person who is not human-sized. Good evening. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Wil Wheaton, and I'm here to talk about some stuff. When Mensa invited me to speak to you tonight, it was very easy to say yes. Though I am not a member, I will get to why in a moment, my son is. This is why you should come tonight, Ryan. I can't, I have a wedding to plan. No, whatever. In fact, my son Ryan took and passed the test when he was 16. He was the youngest in his group. Joining Mensa was something he had wanted to do since he was in 6th grade. And because I am a loving and supportive father, I thought that I could help him prepare. I was in GATE, then AP, then Honors, then Starfleet. So I thought that I could be a good resource for him. And holy shit, was I wrong. It was a humbling moment for me 11 years ago when I discovered that not only did my son not need my help, I was wholly unable to give it. Like, I'm a smart guy, but as far as I am concerned, the Mensa test may as well be administered in Aramaic to subjects who are blindfolded and underwater on Europa. What I remember from the practice tests that I looked at and then quickly read terrified away from was that they tested my ability to reason and extrapolate the solutions to problems both complex and relatively simple, often from incomplete information. I can do that. I did not have much trouble with that part of it. But then there was math. And ever since I was in 3rd grade, I have tried to grok math. And I just don't. I am a smart person, but when it comes to math, I am talking Malibu Stacy. I know you're booing me, but in my mind, you're booing my bad teachers. Still, I accepted this invitation to speak tonight because one of my fundamental rules for living a happy and successful life is don't be the smartest person in the room. This is so much easier for me than it is for you. My corollary to this is if you find yourself being the smartest person in the room, find a new room. This is the only way that you keep growing and challenging yourself to be the most interesting human you can be. One of my other rules is don't follow the most amazing hula hoop guy you've ever seen in your life, because everything you do will be a disappointment by comparison. I am following and breaking rules this evening. So the thing about this is, okay, when you are literally put on a pedestal in front of a room of people who are smarter than you, it is terrifying to stand here. What could I possibly tell a room full of people who are smarter than me? Something geeky. Okay, I can do that. Right. Something geeky. Talk about something geeky that's going to be relevant to a massively diverse group of people who probably aren't judging me. But I will proceed as if they are because that's how my stupid brain works. All right, something geeky. I will talk to you about something geeky. I am a geek. Everything in my life is geeky. It's gonna be okay, Wheaton. Sit down. Write what you know. Right. I will do that later. This went on 4 months. You have not experienced procrastination in its purest, most distilled form until you have been asked to give a speech to a room full of Mensa members. On paper, it sounds like a wonderful opportunity. Here is a chance to talk about anything I want to a group of incredibly smart people. I have to tell you, trying to choose what that topic would be evoked the same kind of anxiety that walking into a hardware store or an art supply store can induce. Like, all of that straight up raw potential is exhilarating, it is exciting, it is enervating, and it is so fucking terrifying and overwhelming. So, I want you to imagine that you are an explorer hundreds of years ago. You are standing on the deck of your ship. Your crew is waiting for you to tell them where you want to go next. You look out toward the horizon, and there is nothing but ocean in every direction. Now, you are an explorer, so this is epic. There's no land masses, no birds, just uncharted sea that, as far as you know, eventually pours off the back of the turtle we're on. Cascading down the backs of all the other turtles that it's stacked on all the way down. We know this to be true because science. If you are an explorer, this is awesome. Because you can just let the wind fill your sails, and then you get to explore that vast blank expanse of water until you find something. You get to make the map. For me, this is terrifying, because I don't want to make the map. I want to read the map. I want the map to show me where I can go and what I can expect to find when I get there. So it's like I have been handed this beautiful work of cartography, some land masses on it. There is a compass that, if you look at it right, is actually a butt, because that is incredibly amusing to my 12-year-old brain. And where I'm going, written in the most gorgeous calligraphy you have ever seen, down in the corner of the map is the phrase, "Here there be geeky things." As recently as 10 years ago, something geeky would have been easy to define. Because those of us who self-identify as geeks or nerds, and who solidified our membership in our culture by arguing what it meant to be a geek or a nerd, and why you were one and not the other because the other ones were weird. Part of a relatively small subculture. And we found our way to the things that we love and continue to love because we didn't really feel all that welcome anywhere else. Or at least we didn't feel comfortable anywhere else. And right now, it is delightfully and magnificently difficult to choose one geeky thing to talk about, because the thing is, we won. The geeks have absolutely inherited the earth. And all the people who tormented us in our lives because we were smart and weird and couldn't catch a football will be the first against the wall when the revolution comes. Yes! Nerds rule! Good night! The worst thing I can do around my wife is crunch on ice, and I just did it into a microphone. And now she is having the worst night of her life. I eventually figured out what I was going to talk to you about tonight. And I really hope that you like it. But before I get there, you have been promised something geeky. So I'm going to briefly go through some of the things that have been instrumental in making me the person that I am today. All of them. We will start with science fiction, specifically in books. In 3rd or 4th grade, part of our curriculum was a monthly trip to a local library to Hunga, California. One of the librarians would read us a short story, give us a short talk about literacy-related topics, and then let us pick a book off of a table of paperbacks that we were all allowed to keep. I was screwed whether we went first based on the first letter of our names, or if we went first based on the first letter of our last names. Thanks, Mom and Dad. We were also allowed and encouraged to check out up to 3 books, which we would have a month to read. I was a nerdy, shy, awkward, weird kid. I was afraid of everything in the world, and the library intimidated me. I never knew where to start. I was afraid I'd pick a book that the cool kids would tease me about reading, and I always felt lost in the stacks. This one librarian, though, reached out to me. She asked me what sorts of things I liked on TV and in the movies. And she recommended a few different books based on my answers, including the first real sci-fi book I can remember reading. It was called Z for Zachariah by Robert C. O'Brien. It makes me so happy that someone went, yes! So I loved this book. I loved it so much that when I went back the next month, the same librarian taught me how to use the card catalog to find other books that were like it, entirely on my own. On that day, the library was transformed from a confusing and intimidating collection of books into 1,000 different portals through time and space to fantastic worlds for me to explore. I don't remember her name, but I remember that she was probably in her 50s. She wore epic 1970s polyester pantsuits, huge glasses that hung from a long gold chain around her neck, and had a hairdo that was 10 miles tall. She was friendly and helpful. And when she reached out to that nerdy, scared, weird, awkward, shy little kid, she changed my life. If any of you are librarians today, you probably don't hear this often enough. Thank you. Thank you for listening. I didn't know it then, but one of the things that drew me to science fiction and then into fantasy was how it rewarded me for using my imagination. And it wasn't just my imagination, and I wasn't just using my imagination to picture myself on a space station or riding a dragon. It was using my imagination to visualize and believe in a world where the things that made me weird and awkward would actually make me cool and valuable. And in using my imagination to experience that reality, I was inspired to work hard to create that reality. And I know that I am not alone in that. Over the last 25 or so years, I have met engineers, chemists, scientists, astronauts, doctors, and professors who all chose their fields because they loved science fiction. Specifically, Star Trek, and even more specifically, the character I played on Star Trek. I know. Whether they are male or female, whether they were kids who watched the show when it was on in the 80s, or they are the children of those kids, they all tell a similar story of being inspired by a young person who could use his intelligence to be valuable to the adults around him. So to digress into that for just a moment, this will come as a surprise to a lot of you in this room, but the character I played on Star Trek, not beloved by everyone. In fact, while he inspired many people to challenge themselves to do great things with their lives, he also inspired some people to develop complex Rube Goldberg machines that resulted in his gruesome death and dismemberment. It always happened in ways that were creative and clever, and I sincerely hope that at least some of those people went on to careers designing courses for American Ninja Warrior. Because I'm obsessed with that show, and I would just like to think that somehow I had a hand in its creation. I bring this specific thing up because over the years, I have determined that the writers on Next Generation missed a huge opportunity to portray something that was happening to me at the time, something that I think was probably happening to other smart kids at the time. This is something that I've learned is really common when extremely intelligent young people are put into an environment like mine. I was the only kid among a group of adults, and we were together 5 days a week, 10 hours a day. And while I loved them, and they loved me, and we were very much a family, there was this huge generation gap between us, because I was a kid, and they were adults. When work was finished, they could all go out for dinner and drinks, and I went home to do my homework. When Depeche Mode came to town for a concert, I could not get them excited about it any more than they could get me excited about the Tower of Power concert they were going to see. To be honest, they still can't. And this created a tremendous amount of angst in me. Because I so desperately wanted their approval. And I so desperately wanted them to think that I was as cool as I thought they were. I was really good at my job. And I could relate to them on a professional level. I knew my lines most of the time. I got to work on time every day. I was present as an actor in the scenes we had together. And when it was time to shoot a scene, I was focused and I was professional. I could relate to them on that professional level, but it was impossible for us to have a similar personal relationship because I was not just a teenager. I was an awkward, nerdy, frequently obnoxious teenager who was too smart for his own good. For years, I have wondered what could have been if the writers of The Next Generation had incorporated that level of emotional conflict into the character I played. And I wonder if that would have made him less of an idea and a plot device and more of a person, like I was, who screws up even when he's trying the best, and then is so embarrassed by screwing up that he can't bring himself to apologize. Epilogue to that whole thing, by the way. I grew up, the generation gap got smaller and eventually closed. Now the rest of the cast and I are all adults. Some of them are my fellow parents. We hang out. I was never able to help them understand why Black Celebration is superior to Violator. But it's an imperfect world. Screws fall out all the time. So, to go back to those pre-Next Generation years, my imagination is where I was most comfortable. And not just because I got to be the hero of every story I told in my imagination, but because I was good at imagining things. Like, I could not look at anything and just accept it for what it was at face value. I was always compelled to think, yeah, that's fine, but what if? And then I'd tell a story about it. This is not always awesome. Sometimes my imagination gets away from me. I will look at a tide pool, and then I will glance up at the ocean beyond it, and I will completely freak myself out imagining that we are right now in something similar to that tide pool, and who knows what is in the ocean that is beyond our perception. I know that I am not alone in this, and the three of you with me. It's a very small tide pool, but we are not alone in it. Asshole kids keep coming and sticking their fingers in my head to watch me shoot up. I know that I am not alone in this. One of my favorite smart people in the world is a physicist named Michio Kaku. He wrote a book that changed my life called Hyperspace. At the beginning of it, he tells a story about how his parents took him to a botanical garden when he was small. And while he was looking at koi fish in a pond, he wondered what would happen if one of those fish was a scientist. And that fish scientist was pulled out of the pond by a human and then put back. That fish scientist would tell its colleagues that it had seen this amazing other part of the world that was just beyond the limits of their perception. And while it was in that world, it could look back and see the world they lived in. And then just as quickly as it was taken out of its world, it was put right back in. And no, it can't replicate the experience because it has no idea how it happened. And why are all you other fish scientists looking at me like I'm crazy? That story blew my mind when I was 17 and first read it. It fired up my imagination in a way that hadn't ever happened before. It made tons of sense to me. Nature likes to replicate tiny, simple things into incredibly complex things. It's like the basic fractal patterns that we can't unsee once we know how to see them, in everything from sand dunes to oak trees. So it stands to reason that we are in something like that pond, and there's something just beyond the surface of the water that we can't perceive or even prove it's there. And holy shit, that is so awesome and so terrifying at the same time. And to serve man is a cookbook! Binds us nerds and geeks together, I think. We all have vivid and active imaginations. And all of us, we all look at the world around us and to some degree go, yeah, but what if? For me, as an entertainer, I write and tell and perform stories that answer that question. For someone who's a physicist or a doctor or an engineer, they actually do something about it. And when everything works out, one of those smart people sees something that an entertainer like me did, and an entire generation takes for granted that they grew up with a phone in their pocket. The least interesting thing about it being that it makes phone calls. I mean, it's really distracting to me when I'm taking a picture and my camera rings. Or I get a text message in the middle of a game of Carcassonne. And it can be catastrophic to get an email pop-up notification when I'm in a timed challenge playing Alpha Bear. Which means that it's a good time to talk about this other geeky thing that is very instrumental in shaping my human existence. Gaming. Specifically, tabletop gaming. This is an excerpt from my book, The Happiest Days of Our Lives. And we will begin in December of 1983. I sat on the floor in my Aunt Val's house, and I opened up her Christmas present to me. It was a red box with a really cool looking dragon on the front of it. Inside there were a few books, some dice, a map, and some crayons. This is a game that I hear lots of kids like to play, Willow, she said. It's dragons and wizards and those things you like from The Hobbit. I was so into The Hobbit, you guys. Even the songs. The back says that you use your imagination to play this game. And I know what a great imagination you have. My brother played with Lego. You can't see it, but I wrote that all capital, L-E-G-O-T-M. Feel free to argue with the people around you about which is the correct way to write Lego. I did the audio version of Randall Munroe's book, What If? And one of the questions in What If is, could you build a bridge of Lego that goes all the way across the Atlantic Ocean? And Randall sets about to solve this problem. How would you distribute the weight across the Lego? How much will the Lego have to weigh? How big would the Lego be? But he writes Lego differently every single time. And he footnotes it with a different justification for it every single time. And he specifically did it to elicit that reaction. And I tried really hard to honor that in the audio version of the text, but unfortunately it didn't work. Anyway, my brother played with Lego, spelled in the method of your choosing, which, by the way, is wrong. And my cousins played with handheld electronic games. This was 1983, remember. Boy, did I feel ripped off. Wow, I said, trying to mask my disappointment. Thanks, Aunt Val. Later, while the other kids played with Simon and Mattel electronic football, I sat near the fireplace and I examined my gift. It said that I could be a wizard or a fighter, but there weren't any pieces that looked like that. There were some very weird dice, and I got to color in the numbers on them. That seemed kind of silly to me, but it was something to do, so I grabbed the black crayon and I rubbed it over the pale blue dice, just like the instructions said. My Aunt Val, who was my very favorite relative in the world throughout my entire childhood, right up until she died, and I still miss her, walked into the living room. What do you think, Willow? I colored the dice, I said, but I haven't read the book yet. She patted my leg. Well, I hope you like it. She moved to the other side of the room where my cousin Jack played with Nintendo Game & Watch. Mario's Cement Factory. Does not hold up. But in 1983, it was a miracle. I opened the player's book and I began to read. It is now February of 1984. It was afternoon PE in 5th grade and I was terrified. Like every afternoon PE in 5th grade. I ran and I jumped and I ducked, surrounded by a jeering crowd of my classmates. The PE teacher did nothing to stop the attack, in fact, encouraged it. Get him! Someone yelled as I fell to the asphalt, small rocks digging into my palms. I breathed hard. Through my adrenaline-fueled fight or flight response, the world slowed, the jeering faded, and I wondered to myself why our playground was a parking lot, and why we had to wear corduroy pants in the middle of a Southern California heat wave. The answer was because Jesus. It's not a joke, that's true. He died for your sins, but he does not want to see your knees when you're in school. Before my brain could offer up any answers, a clear and loud voice spoke from within my head. Dude, get up and move or you're dead. I nodded my head and I looked up in time to see the red playground ball spinning in slow motion, the word of Voight rotating into view. Pain exploded across my face and a cheer erupted from the crowd. The PE teacher blew her whistle. I don't know how I managed to be the last kid standing on our team. I usually ran right to the front of the court so I could get knocked out quickly and hopefully painlessly before the good players got worked up by the furor of battle and started taking headshots. But I'd been stricken by a bout of temporary insanity, possibly caused by the heat wave, on this February day, and I'd actually played to win the game using a very simple strategy: run like hell and hope to get lucky. I blinked back tears as I looked up at Jimmy Just, who had delivered the fatal blow. Jimmy was the playground bully. He spent as much time in the principal's office as he did in our classroom, and he was the most feared dodgeball player in school. He laughed at me, his long hair stuck to his face in sweaty mats, and he sneered, "Nice try, Wil the Pill." I picked myself up off the ground, determined not to cry. I sucked in deep breaths of air through my nose. Mrs. Cooper, the PE teacher, walked over to me. "Are you okay, Wil?" she asked. "Do I look okay?" is what I wanted to say. "Uh-huh," is what I did say. Anything more than that and I risked breaking down into humiliating sobs that would follow me around the rest of the school year and maybe even into 6th grade. "Why don't you go wash off your face," she said, not unkindly, "and sit down for a minute." "Okay," I said, and I walked slowly across the blacktop to the drinking fountains. Maybe if I really took my time, I could run out the clock, and I wouldn't have to go play another stupid dodgeball game. Go back in time to January of 1984. Papers scattered across my bed appeared to be homework to the casual observer. But to me, they were people. A thief, a couple of wizards, some fighters, a party of adventurers, hanging out in the keep on the borderlands, preparing to storm the caves of chaos. But without anyone to guide them, they sat alone, trapped in the purgatory of my bedroom, straining beneath college-ruled blue lines to come to life. I tried to recruit my younger brother to play with me, but he was 7, and more interested in something called Monchi-Chi. Kids in my neighborhood were more interested in football and riding bikes, so I was left to read through the module B2 by myself. It is once again February 1984. I washed my face and drank deeply from the drinking fountain. By the time I made it back to the benches along the playground's southern edge, I'd lost the urge to cry, but my face radiated enough heat to compete with the blistering La Crescenta sun. I sat down next to this kid, Simon Teal, who, thanks to the wonders of alphabetization, ended up with me and Harry Yan, the school's lone Asian kid, on field trips, on fire drills, and in chapel. Simon was taller than us. He wore his hair down into his face, and he always kept to himself. He was reading an oversized book. It looked kind of like a textbook filled with charts and tables. We weren't officially friends, but I knew him well enough to make polite conversation. "Hey," I said, "why don't you have to play dodgeball?" "Asthma," he said. "Oh, you are so lucky." This is before I ended up with asthma years later. "I hate dodgeball." "Everyone hates dodgeball," he said, "except Jimmy Just." "Yeah," I said, relieved to hear someone say out loud something I'd been thinking since 3rd grade. "Hey," I said, "what are you reading?" He held up the book and I saw its cover. A giant statue, illuminated by torches, sat behind an archway. 2 guys were on its head, prying loose one of its jeweled eyes, as a group of people stood at the base. One was clearly a wizard, another one obviously a knight. "This is the player's handbook," he said. "Do you play D&D?" I gasped. According to our ultra-religious school, D&D was satanic. I looked up for teachers, but none were nearby. 100 feet away on the playground, another game of dodgeball was underway. I flinched when I heard that pang of the balls that skipped off the ground. I'm 43 years old, 44 next month. I still run away from dodgeballs. "You're going to get into big trouble if you get caught with that," I said. "No, I won't," he said. "I just keep it turned upside down, they never see it." "So do you play or not?" "I have the red box set," I said, "and a bunch of characters, but I don't have anyone to play with." "That's basic," he said. This is advanced. Oh. But if you want, you can come over to my house this weekend and we could play. I could not believe my luck. With a dodgeball to the face, fate put me on the bench next to the kid who, over the next few months, helped me take my first tentative steps down the path into geekdom. For those of you who are modern role players, it's like succeeding with a consequence in Fate, our apocalypse role. He had a ton of AD&D books. Dungeon Master's Guide, which had a truly terrifying demon on the cover, which would absolutely result in expulsion if it's seen at school. The Monster Manual, which was full of dragons. And the Fiend Folio, which not only had demons and devils, but a harpy and a nymph, which had a drawing of a naked lady who had boobs. If there was any doubt that 12-year-old me had just discovered the greatest thing in the history of life. Simon's parents were divorced and he lived with his mom in a huge house in La Cañada. His room was filled with evidence of a custody Cold War. Too many toys to count littered the floor and spilled out of the closet, but even though we were surrounded by Atari and Intellivision, they must have been millionaires. We had D&D fever, and the only prescription was more dice. Of all the things that make me a geek, of all the things I do to celebrate being a geek, nothing brings me as much joy as gaming. And it all started with that D&D basic set. Today, it takes an entire room in my house to contain all of my books, all of my boxes, and all of my dice. And that time that I talked about a few minutes ago, when I was feeling weird and confused and frustrated, when I was an obnoxious teenager with my awkwardness set to maximum, that's when tabletop gaming became the foundation of the best friendships I have ever had. It is the mortar that has held my group of friends together for almost 30 years. And like science fiction, gaming inspires my imagination. Because when we play a game, any game, we are using our imagination to bring a world to life. And that's truly special. Because while all destruction is essentially the same, when you create something, it is different and special every single time. When you create something together, you are building bonds with your fellow gamers that could last for your entire lives. The Venn diagram of my best friends, my gaming group, and the people from high school I still want to talk to is one perfect circle. And the whole reason that I created my show Tabletop was because I wanted to help other people find the same joy, the same friendships, the same enduring relationships that I found because of gaming. I want to talk about one more geeky thing before I talk about the thing I'm really going to talk about. That is, what does it mean to be a geek? What does it mean to be a nerd? When I was a little boy, and those magical pocket phones only existed in speculative fiction, I privately mocked the jocks for their tribalistic football rituals, the same way that they openly mocked me for playing Dungeons and Dragons, never realizing until very recently that although we loved very different things, we loved them in exactly the same way. And that's when I started talking about how being a geek isn't about what you love. It's about the way that you love it. My friend John Rogers once observed that fantasy sports is D&D for jocks. And I love that, because it means that everything is geeky if you do it right. Parenthetically, I won my fantasy baseball league year after year after year by drafting overvalued fan favorites early and then trading them to people who didn't understand sabermetrics. Because game theory? I'm not allowed to play that league anymore. It's not my fault that you had to have Chase Utley. 4 of you know what that means. But this is the... But this is the great thing about being a nerd. A normal person turns on their computer and they're happy it just works. A normal person cannot understand why you would want to compile your own Linux kernel in Slackware in a virtual machine, and I wonder why you wouldn't want to do that. A normal person watches a movie and goes home. A nerd watches a movie and is like, that is source material for my headcanon, and I will fight you about it. A normal person turns on a light bulb and never even stops to think for a second about how much Edison fucked over Tesla. Don't even want to attempt to build their own Van de Graaff generator or a Tesla coil. Where a normal person sees something like a slice of sourdough bread. A baking geek like me sees a starter that's been carefully fed for years and wonders, how long was that dough allowed to rise? And was it folded or was it punched and kneaded? Oh, maybe it was no kneading, it was an 18-hour slow rise. Maybe I could get some of their starter and grow my own starter from it and then do a side-to-side comparison of my own loaves, accounting for temperature and humidity. And, oh my God, I forgot there's 15 people in line behind me and I haven't even ordered my sandwich yet. It's not entirely my fault. He asked me if I wanted to try their new sourdough bread. So when I think about what it means to be one of us, when I think about what it means to be a geek, or a nerd, or a dweeb, or a dork, or a doofus, or a weirdo, I think it means that we just love things in a uniquely enthusiastic way. And we get so excited about the things that we love, we cannot help but share those things with other people long after they have lost interest. And they really just want us to answer, do we want the sandwich toasted or not? And while our enthusiasm for the things that make up what we tend to think of as geek culture is awesome, I have something to say about that. We don't get to decide what the right way is to be a geek about anything. We don't get to decide who gets to go to Comic-Con any more than a baseball fan gets to decide who gets to buy a ticket to see the Dodgers. And side note, fuck you, Time Warner Cable. Give me my goddamn Dodgers back on television, scatty Dodgers. Last time I checked, it was the Los Angeles Dodgers, not the Time Warner Cable. Subscribe to our shitty package, Dodgers. They're the worst. The worst. I can go on and on about those of us who are elder geeks, and those of you who are geeks probably feel like it's just so damn easy to be a geek right now. The damn kids today don't even know how good they have it. Awesome! If everything is geeky, maybe nothing's geeky. And that means that gatekeeping and nerd and geek culture is a pointless waste of time. So when someone tells you that they love X-Men, or Game of Thrones, or Star Wars, or learning to program in Python, the best way to respond is with a high five, or a sci-five. Not a pop quiz. Because every single one of us, when we were proto-nerds, we met someone who said, oh, you like this thing that I like? Cool, let's like it together and meet some other people who like it, and bam, Star Trek convention. And that was awesome. And then when crappy corporations came around and tried to turn conventions into just the most efficient way possible to separate us from our money, people who loved it took it back. Because we loved having a